We had a common bond, which was that we were involved in tech in some manner. We pledged that we would support the Armenian tech industry. And at the time, not only was it a fledgling industry, but it was in a shambles. It was in terrible shape. It was as though somebody had lit it on fire and made it destroyed before we could rebuild it. And why is that? If you remember back then, they burned all the trees. So they didn't have much electricity. So people, in order to connect to the internet, had to go through a lot of difficulty. We had an industry that had been part of the Soviet industrial complex. Kocharyan's administration invited the diasporans to come in and find a solution to this problem. You'll come to Armenia and meet, find a common ground together to work.
Welcome to Soulful Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Lucy Stepanyan. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Berge Ayvazian, a renowned expert in 5G networks and mobile internet evolution. With over 2 decades of experience at Wireless 2020 and Yankee Group in leadership positions, Berge has shaped the telecom industry trajectory through strategic consulting and thought leadership. Welcome, Berge. Thanks for sharing your valuable time with us today.
Thank you for asking me.
So, I want to start with talking a little bit about being Armenian and what that means to you. So I think throughout your career, you have continuously been involved in a lot of Armenian initiatives and economic development of Armenia. Where was this desire initially stemming from to support Armenia's economic development?
So, as you said, throughout my career, I have been an Armenian. Because the first question they ask me is, you have an unusual name. What background is that? So by the time I explain it, I may as well do something that's relevant to being Armenian. For example, putting Ararat behind my head on this screen. At the same time, for a long, long time, in the beginning half of my career, I really didn't have much time available to spend being Armenian. And in fact, I got married early and started having kids, as well as having a very active career, traveling a lot. In fact, traveling not just in the United States, but around the world. So I didn't really have too much time. Starting in 1999, I decided to invest more time and effort into being Armenian and to finding ways to bring my career and being Armenian into synchronicity, to be synchronized so that they could benefit from each other. I should make an anecdote, which is that my brother had not only studied Russian in college, but had spent a lot of his career working for Armenian organizations, beginning with the earthquake, and he was part of the earthquake relief. So I knew from the beginning what it was like to give your life to being an Armenian. And I always was jealous of his ability to invest time and effort into being Armenian. My brother and I had very close lives together early on, but they diverged. And I became very ingrained in my professional career, and his career allowed him to be much more involved in Armenian life. But that changed in 1999.
And when you say being Armenian, what does that mean to you specifically?
Well, put it this way. I could not avoid being Armenian. I grew up in an Armenian household. My grandmother didn't speak English. I went to Armenian school on Saturdays, so I had a background. But at the same time, once I went to college and graduate school and started my career, I just didn't really have time to invest in being involved in Armenian activities as much. Although I did support Armenian initiatives, usually in the background, but sometimes a little bit more in the front.
Would you say that for Armenians who are outside of Armenia, it's more important to preserve Armenian identity and they actually put thought into what being Armenian means versus people in Armenia who live there? Because I'm from Armenia. I've never thought about what being Armenian means and what are some of the values that I have as an Armenian when I was living in Armenia. The moment I moved I started experiencing this feelings of love towards Armenia, and then also obviously missing my family and Armenia itself. But that hasn't been the case before moving outside of Armenia. I haven't really thought about what does being Armenian and mean to me. Would you agree with that?
First of all, you've had the luxury not only of being from Armenia, but of living most of your life during which Armenia was an independent country. Whereas I lived the first half of my life where we never imagined having an independent country called Armenia. We always thought either we were subject to the Ottoman Empire under Turkish rule, or we were part of the Soviet Union. And even then, when we had an earthquake and my brother went for earthquake relief, it was part of the Soviet Union. And interestingly enough, when Armenia became a separate country, a lot of the tragic history became part of the future.
Yeah. And you've been a part of a lot of initiatives, not just in telecom space, but also in the tech space nowadays as well, right? What would you say was the most important role that you played in developing the tech ecosystem or the telecom space?
So I referred to 1999 as an important date. It so happened that at that time we had President Kocharyan, and he called an economic summit at the Citibank building in New York and invited many of us to come and participate. When we arrived, the message that his administration gave to us was, for those of us in the diaspora, we had to do something that would benefit Armenia through our profession, our knowledge, our connections, our relationships, and our trajectory of our careers so that it would grow as we grew. And he challenged all of us in the audience, and there was about 1,000 of us in the audience, to become active diasporans, to create an economic benefit to Armenia from our efforts. So I joined with about 20 guys who were in the tech sector. And at the time, it was a pretty small number. I must say, looking around the room, there were only 20 of us who were in tech, although there were probably more that weren't there. But most of them were jewelers or in the restaurant business or some other food business. So those of us who were in tech were invited to a private meeting with Kocharyan and his team. And one of the guys sitting next to me was my friend Nubar Afeyan. Another one was Al Esayan. Another one was a guy named Razmik Abdus. But those of us who were there, many of us didn't know each other, but we had a common bond, which was that we were involved in tech in some manner, and we pledged that we would support the Armenian tech industry. And at the time, not only was it a fledgling industry, but it was in a shambles. It was in terrible shape. It was as though somebody had lit it on fire and made it destroyed before we could rebuild it. And why is that? Well, because if you remember back then, you were then probably a kid, they burned all the trees. So they didn't have much electricity. So people, in order to connect to the internet, had to go through a lot of difficulty. There was still a monopoly Armen telephone company. A lot of the impediments were there. We had an industry that had been part of the Soviet industrial complex, so that the Armenian piece was a fragment and it was a piece of a big puzzle. And once that puzzle collapsed, Armenia had no market, no suppliers, and no ecosystem. So all these companies who had employed lots of people, scientists, technologists, whatever, immediately collapsed economically. And Kocharyan's administration invited the diasporans to come in and find a solution to this problem. So the first thing he did was he said, I will appoint your counterparts in Armenia, and I will form a group of like-minded people in Armenia that will work with you, but you have to form something yourselves. And then make a decision when you'll come to Armenia and meet and find a common ground together to work. So very quickly, I was asked to incorporate the Armenian High-Tech Council.
And do you think that the outcomes that you have set in front of you every probably 5 years or so, have you achieved those, or you've had a lot of obstacles and you had to change paths throughout the way?
So I would say the answer is yes to both. That on the one hand, we achieved a lot of things. Yeah. Not all were successful. And in fact, the most successful was that we adapted to the environment and to the obstacles and to the challenges we faced. And we had to find ways to get around either or leapfrog these challenges. But I'll tell you, what else is interesting is that we were not alone in doing this. Very quickly, Armenia was adopted by the World Bank as an example of a small nascent country that could use technology to develop and to solve the fundamental problems that small countries with big diasporas have. Mm-hmm. They turned a guy named Lev Frankman, who was in the World Bank economic sector, adopted Armenia as his kind of second nationality. And he invented this term from brain drain to brain gain.
Mm-hmm. I've heard this before.
You've heard it before. Well, yeah. He assigned that name to our group.
Has it ever been difficult to work with Armenians in Armenia? I'm assuming there are differences, right, between diasporan Armenians and Armenians who live in Armenia, especially at that time, if we talk about back 20 years ago. Now, less so.
You ask, has it ever been difficult? The question is, has it ever been not difficult?
Okay.
It's always difficult. I will tell you, for example, my first trip to Armenia, I went 3 months before our first Congress, just to make contact with our counterparts. Kocharyan had appointed a guy who was Artsakh Armenian originally. So he didn't speak any language that I could understand. His way of working was to sit in a room and smoke cigarettes continuously throughout the conversation he and I had. In order for me to communicate with him, I had to bring an interpreter. The interpreter was one of the locals who had decided to join our movement, and he was Hayastansi and could speak both languages, meaning he could speak Eastern Armenian Artsakh dialect as well as Armenian and English, so we could have a dialogue, we could communicate. And I ended up spending 3 hours with this guy. You know how they say, so somehow we communicated, somehow we worked out a way to both work together and find common ground. But it was difficult, and it continues to be difficult to this day. And in fact, as you know, being Armenian is to struggle. That is the nature of being Armenian. So we knew that. We have lived not only through that, but we benefited from it.
How so? How did you benefit from that?
Because we had to do everything the hard way. Mm-hmm. We had to invent new ways. We had to create solutions for problems that we didn't even know we had. And we had to anticipate problems that we were going to have. If we continued in the same direction, we're likely going to hit this obstacle that we don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be there. And when we get there, it's going to happen.
Has there ever been time when you regretted contributing so much time, effort, resources into the development of Armenia, or just decided that this is not working, I'm out? Have you ever reached that point?
Sure, only on Tuesdays. Every other day, we had no problem. We worked very diligently and we felt very good about it. But on Tuesdays, we reached a point in the week when we got tired, or we looked back on previous week's work and said, it's not really going as well as we hoped. Maybe we should change our focus and get back to our own career. Now, that was a joke, but it's not a joke. What I mean by that is this happens periodically, and it almost happens cyclically, so that as long as you realize this is a short-term phenomenon. So, okay, we have a setback, or we realize it's not going as well or as fast as we would like. All right, so let's go back to plan A and work on our own career, which is, by the way, a good thing. So I'll give you a small example in my case, personal case. Okay. One of the things I thought about in my career was I wanted to be part of a company that was bigger than me. My first job was with a startup consulting business where the guy built it from scratch, and he was quite small when I joined. I did move up, but it never became more than 20 or 30 people. And I finally realized I outgrew that company and I left. And I joined a much larger company that had a much more substantial base of success. And I was relatively insignificant in that company for a few years, but I focused on developing my role in the company and ultimately became one of the top 10 executives in successful company. And at a point in time when the owner decided to sell that company, and he offered 10 of us the opportunity to be on the new management team that would be part of the company that acquired us rather than limited to our own business. And in fact, he asked me to become the first CEO after the founder. By then, we had over 300 employees. We had 20 offices around the world. We had quite a successful business. We had just been acquired, but we also knew that our founder had committed only 3 years to remaining with the company.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I was going to have to step up and take his role, take his place. So I said, okay, even though this is right near the time when I'm starting this Armenia initiative in 2000 or so, I said, okay, I have to focus my effort on my career and on this opportunity. And I can't afford to have too much time and effort devoted to Armenian activity. I have to use this opportunity to its fullest. And in fact, it worked. It worked out quite well. And I was able to even bridge it to my Armenian activity and try and drive some benefit to Armenia from that outcome. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we always regretted that dichotomy. There were some of us who uniquely had come up with a way to bring their Armenian life and their professional life together, but that was the rare case. They were usually parallel, and you could only make them intersect at certain points, certain ways, certain reasons, and you do the best you could.
So do you think there are any other characteristics or personality traits that really helped you succeed and just grow within the organization?
Entrepreneurship is kind of ingrained in me. Mm-hmm. Although I joined a large company and was starting at the bottom, et cetera, I knew that I always wanted to be able to run the business and be able to make decisions as though I was the founder. And so when I had the opportunity to both become the next CEO after the founder, I wanted to also gain some ability to take the company forward differently than he had. So the example I'll give, just quickly say this, he sold the company to a regional company that was acquiring other companies to build an ecosystem. And he sold it for a certain amount of money. And basically, they agreed to double that amount if he achieved certain profit and revenue growth goals. I'll never forget, he sat down with us on the management team, and he created a little chart that said, if we grow revenue like this, and we grow profit like this, we'll reach a point where I will maximize the amount that they will pay me in addition to what they paid in the beginning. And I have 3 years to do it. And he said, in the first year, we're going to create demand and create the potential distribution channels, offices, salespeople. We're going to hire a lot of salespeople, and we're going to sell and generate revenue. And for a period of time, we will exceed our profit because we would be spending more money than we're making, but we'd be investing in growth, revenue growth. And then abruptly, at some point when we thought we reached the pinnacle of that, we would cut costs. If it's necessary, we'd close offices. We would reduce our sales force. because our subscription research business meant that our revenues were annualized, spread out over time, and it wouldn't necessarily affect our revenue to cut our costs. So one day he walked in and said, okay, we're going to cut off half of our sales force. We're going to close all of our offices outside the US. We're going to cut our costs in half, so our profit will double. We said, well, wait a minute now. What about all our clients? What about, we don't want to let all these people go. We just spent all this time hiring them. He said, no, you don't understand. I got to maximize what they pay me at the end, double the amount the company's worth. So we said, all right, we understand. So a few weeks went by, and I went out with the number 2 guy in the company without telling the boss, out to the parent company's headquarters. And we said, do you know what he's doing? No, what's he doing? Well, he's cutting all our costs, closing all our offices, letting all our salespeople go, so that within 6 months, we will be a shell of ourselves. We will be half the size of the organization. We will be very profitable, but you will inherit a company that doesn't have those same sales channels, that same revenue growth potential. And they said, really? Why is he doing that? I said, because you created the system. You gave him the incentive to grow revenue first and profit second. Now it's time for profit, and he doesn't care. He's going to do it. So they said, well, what should we do about it? We're not going to go in and tamper with his business. We said, no, we're not asking you to do that, but we're asking you to shorten the term. Instead of 3 years, make it 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, tell him that you're going to max out your payout and give us the chance to avoid having to cut everything so fast, so that we can continue to grow. Certainly, they took our advice, and they agreed to release him from his obligations, to give him his 3-year payout in 2 years. He became an MIT professor. He started the Entrepreneurship program at the Sloan School of Management. He also started his own VC firm, another one, which he called Yankee Tech Ventures. And he became emeritus CEO or founder, and I became CEO. Now, of course, there was a trick to this. The parent company said, okay, now guys, we just had to pay him double what we initially agreed to pay because he maxed out his goals. So now you have to earn that money back, and we want you to take the company public. We want you to do an IPO. So I said, wait a minute. This company has been a private company for 20 odd years. Why would we all of a sudden want to do an IPO? Well, we have to. So they gave me lawyers, bankers, and accountants and said, you have to go do an IPO and ultimately a roadshow, et cetera, et cetera. So I was working on this IPO, and I realized, first of all, the economy doesn't want IPOs right now. Second of all, we're not big enough or fast growing enough to be able to do it. I don't think this is a good idea. So I said to the guys, hey, listen, I'm very happy to do an IPO if it will work, but if you're trying to get a return on this investment, maybe you'd be better off selling it. Well, who's going to buy it? Well, so the net of it is I found a buyer, and it happened to be a company called Reuters, which is a fairly well-known global company that had ambitions in this sector. And they were acquiring other research companies in the US. And they happened to tap me on the shoulder and looked at me as a potential, let's say, collaborator. And I said, well, why don't you buy my company first? Next thing I know, they bought Yankee Group for double what the parent company paid, even after they doubled what they paid him. So next thing I know, they were very happy. I worked out the deal, and I became an investment banker without knowing how to do it. And I sold their company for them, and I joined the parent company, Reuters. So all of a sudden, I had an office in London, and I worked with this acquisition team. And in addition to working at Yankee Group, I worked with Reuters. So what I'm saying is, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what left turn is going to occur, and you're thinking you're going to the right, and all of a sudden it's left. And so all through that period, I was doing Armenian stuff, and I was enjoying having the two things going on at the same time. Now, unfortunately, I also had a couple of kids during that period. My wife didn't see me very much, but, they survived.
Yeah. I want to challenge you on the idea of Armenia becoming an AI hub. I can think of some other countries that could potentially qualify for being an AI hub, but does Armenia have all the necessary preconditions at this point to get there? Because I think it's not just brain power, right? We do have a lot of people, but we also have brain drain, like you said. And do we have the necessary and ripe ecosystem in place and policies in place, research and development to actually make this into reality?
Now, I'm glad you're challenging me, and I don't want to answer you not only without thought, but with an assumption that we will succeed. In order to be successful in the AI sector, basically we need three ingredients. We need innovation and advanced technology. So, for example, supercomputing and the platforms that are now being created using GPUs and NVIDIA technology to elevate and accelerate computing to support AI development. We've been working on that for Armenia for some time, both located in Armenia and being part of the Armenian technology ecosystem. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physically located, but it has to be part of the solution. The second is we need a talent pool. We need the brains, the trained individuals. And so we realized that in order for this to be developed over a 10-year period, we need to reach down not just to those who are graduate students or who are already trained, but my colleagues in FAST who are creating Generation AI are going to high schools and starting to develop the training programs so that they come out the other end and they enter robotics, they enter different fields that benefit from the AI training. And it's almost like learning geometry. It's not necessarily a different field. It's part of math. It's part of the thinking they're doing. The third thing is we need to have a global initiative. So it's not just a talent pool inside Armenia. It's not just Armenians around the world who are part of the diaspora, who are part of this movement. It has to be all the Armenians by choice. What do I mean by that? People who are not Armenian, people who realize Armenians are a good example of a small people who have become innovative and successful through innovation, and they want to be called Armenian even though they're not Armenian.
Last couple of questions to wrap this up. I know we're over time. What is one advice you would give to Armenian entrepreneurs in this day and age of rapid evolvement of evolution of AI?
So the first advice I give my startup entrepreneur people I'm coaching, people I'm advising, is don't be too greedy. Don't be driven by greed or allow ambition to force you into decisions that ultimately will lead to failure. You can be ambitious, you can want an economic return, but realize that your investors have as much skin in the game as you, and that you need to pass it on or pay it forward so that as you become successful, make other people successful. What does that mean? Well, create internships in your company so that college students can see what successful startup companies can do and become part of them, even though they may only be there 2 months in between semesters. So that earlier stage startups, don't think of them as competing for venture capital or angel investors. Think of them as companies that can innovate beyond the walls of your business. And it's already happened, by the way. Many of the Armenian startups have become part of a group of angel type investors in the next generation of startups. As another example, my friend Hovannes Avoyan, who is running Pixart these days, he realizes that not only is Pixar successful, not only do they have a potential for an IPO, but they have both a talent pool and an ecosystem around them that can create the proving ground for other startups, for other businesses, for other initiatives. Or take another example. Look at our friends at Service Titan. They have both acquired companies, early stage, or in fact have asked them to apply Service Titan in a sector they're not in, but they've also spun off companies that can become more successful because they're driven by entrepreneurial efforts to open up a new sector, to open up a new area. The principle of Service Titan is still in there, but it's not necessarily going into their pocket. It's going into somebody else's pocket. And they know they have to pay it forward. They know their fathers were either plumbers or HVAC technicians, and that they taught them their business in order for them to write software around the business, in order for them to create a service around that software, in order for them to create a whole industry where you manage the field service operations, the service businesses using software, and that other people can do it. They can apply it in their respective sectors. So this is how I treat this.
Awesome. Last question. Thinking back to your career and in various spaces and both contributing to Armenia and also your professional career in the States, do you have any regrets?
You always have regrets. I regret that yesterday I spent time in the gym and I didn't do as much work as I had planned. Or a week ago, I didn't spend as much time with my grandson as I would have liked. But you know what? I can fix that next week. I can make myself more productive, more efficient. So I try not to allow regrets to set me back. I just have them guide me to doing something more effectively the next time. But yes, regrets are part of the life puzzle. If you don't fail, you'll never know what success is. If you don't fall short of your goals, you don't make mistakes, you'll never know how to do things the right way. And sometimes you may, hit your thumb with a hammer along the path and say, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Or you might, miss an opportunity. I could have made a lot of money if I put money on that early on. But at the time, it didn't make sense or it wasn't the right thing to do. So again, if you think about setbacks as setbacks, you'll fail. If you think about them as lessons learned, as ways to redirect and correct your focus and your initiative, you'll benefit from it and you'll learn from it.
On that note, I want to thank you for your time and sharing your stories, your experiences, and valuable lessons that you've gained along the way. I appreciate it greatly.
Well, I appreciate you having the Soulful Entrepreneur Podcast so that we have a chance to express ourselves, to communicate that experience, and to communicate and share that with others. And I've already watched and listened to the other episodes in this series, and I'm looking forward to the others you're going to do. So keep doing good work.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
I want it to mean a lot. Your success is our future.